Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today, all the way from Sydney, Australia, Darren Chait. Darren, you're the co-founder and COO of Hugo, which is a centralized searchable meeting notes. They're Hugo, centralized searchable meeting notes that connect with your favorite tools. We're totally getting into that because I teach a remote meetings masterclass. So this is of
Oh,
particular
wow.
interest to me. But let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work
Yeah,
done?
sure. Thanks for that. Yeah. For me, it's my virtual office, wherever I'm working from, looks a lot like a real traditional office. The idea that you can have a laptop on your lap, sitting on a couch, makes no sense for professional remote workers. So we're talking screens, webcam, keyboard, mice, heater, fan, AC, whatever you need to make your office feel like a real office. So I've definitely invested very heavily in my virtual office with that setup.
So I'm really curious about that because that's something people are wrestling with right now amidst COVID times is, you've set up a makeshift office. And I've been telling them, like, invest in comfort. Why is it
Yeah.
important to you? I mean, just beyond the reasons of just being comfortable, of course, but why is
Mm.
this so important to you?
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons. I hear the same sort of anecdotes of, day one remote work. I have my MacBook on the dining table with kids at my feet, and I'm wondering why I'm less productive. Whereas you go back to the office and you have snacks and a coffee machine and screens and it's very. So I think one is the practicality. Is obviously you're spending a lot of time at your desk and you need to look after yourself and have what you need to get work done. And I think that's the obvious one. For me personally, it's more psychological. When I made the shift to invest in an office at home, I appreciate that this is how I work. This is my workplace now. It's not just a laptop on the weekends on the dining room table. It's my office. And sort of the respect for the workplace, regardless of if we're paying rent in the city or I'm at working from the other end of the globe, changes the way I work. And that for me has made remote work successful.
I love that you've brought this up because the comfort part is the part that people focus on, but I think the psychological part
Yeah.
is extremely important. And I like that you say the respect for the workplace. So this is actually a great area for remote workers to take advantage of setting up what they need to be most productive. Like you could have, I heard Matt Mullenweg of Automatic give an interview, and he says, like, I have candles on my desk, and I'm like, yeah, actually, it's such a great idea. Like you could do anything, it's your space. You don't have to follow any office rules or anything. So that makes it especially
Yeah,
exciting.
exactly. Draw on the walls, like have whatever sort of crazy plants and animals and anything you want to do to make you most effective. There's no lease agreement that has the rules, or no coworkers next to you that you have to not offend or upset. So
Right?
you
Maybe
have
a
an
spouse.
opportunity, maybe a
Yeah.
spouse, but
Yeah.
it's harder for them to leave. So less important. But yeah, no, you have an opportunity to build this ideal workspace. So it always blows me away when people don't invest in it at all. When I say invest, I don't even mean financially. I mean, psychologically creating that space and treating it like an office.
Love it. So I said that you are in Sydney right now, but you're
Yeah.
not usually based in Sydney. You're based in San Francisco along. That's where the headquarters of Hugo is. We'll get into that in a second. But I do want to
Yeah.
acknowledge that it's because of COVID that you're based in Sydney at the moment, or that you're in
Yeah.
Sydney.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
So
Yeah.
I was going to say, how has that changed the way you're
Barely.
working with your team?
It's really interesting when COVID hit and we were planning a trip to Sydney to visit family, and it was a sort of no-brainer, easy decision to stay here because of the minimal impact on the way we work. And I actually came from life as a corporate lawyer before I co-founded Hugo. And to think then, if I was overseas and trying to continue this as usual, that would be the end of that job, the end of my career, something not possible. And now it was just a quick discussion with my wife, a quick comment to the team that I'm going to be working from Sydney for the next little while. And it's no problem. It's business as usual. And being able to make a decision for my family and for myself without a huge trade-off for work, really, it's one of the first times where the pennies completely dropped with remote work. normally you're making that trade-off, and it just wasn't the case. I could just continue exactly as I was work-wise, but being able to prioritize, in this case, safety and having family around and whatever else. So it's been pretty great to have that opportunity and be in Sydney, but because we're such sort of comfortable, such a comfortable distributed team, we're very used to working that way.
So before we get into Hugo, I promise we will get to that because I'm actually super excited. But I got to ask you about the time zones. It's a huge time zone difference. I mean, Australia is notorious.
Yeah.
Australia, New Zealand,
Yeah.
notorious for time zone issues. How are you guys dealing with the time zone issues?
Yeah. So it's not easy straight up. And I think to paint a picture of it being perfect and not mattering wouldn't be fair. I am working earlier in the day. I'm waking up early to get some good overlap, particularly with the east coast of the US and a little bit of Europe. But in reality, I think there's two things. So there's compromise and understanding for the team. It works well. A lot of our New York-based team, for example, are now happy to sleep in a little bit, knowing that we're online a bit later in Australia. But I think more interestingly, it's this shift towards asynchronous ways of working. And I can talk about this for hours. It's something I always get really excited about. But gone are the days where Lisette and Darren need to work together by being in the same room or virtual room in this case, or on chatting to each other in real time. We use video very heavily. There's some great products out there like Loom and others, where I can wake up in the middle of the night your time, have this really cool idea that I want to tell you about, and I can just record a quick video where I can share my screen. You can see my face. You can see how excited I am or how concerned I am. You can wake up and get up to speed, and then you can drop me a note, or we can discuss when I'm online. And working asynchronously is really the secret sauce to successful remote teams, especially global remote teams, in our experience. And we've really proved it out over the last few months, particularly because we're now operating 24 hours a day as a company.
Okay, we're totally going to dive into this topic of asynchronous behavior. But first, let's talk about Hugo and what it does. So it's a centralized searchable meeting notes that connects with your favorite tools. And I think I've wrote it down a little bit wrong from your website, but tell us what Hugo is and why did you build it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier, I come from a background as a corporate lawyer. My co-founder comes from a background as a product manager. And we learn that meetings where decisions get made, where discussion occurs, where teams get in sync. And it's really the interface for teamwork, one of the key interfaces for teamwork. And what's really strange is that nothing's changed in generations. We're working in such different ways. Obviously, we're talking about that right now. We have so much technology powering how we work together, but meetings still require everyone to be together synchronously, like we mentioned. Sure, and there maybe not as much in a room now. We can do it on a Zoom call, for example, but it's still both of our time. It's of no value to people who aren't in the meeting. So my teammates, your teammates don't get any of this value. Half of what we talk about is going to get lost anyway. And no matter how enlightening or how insightful the meeting is, there's very poor retention of that knowledge. We sort of learned as we started building a team that meeting notes are the secret there. We see meeting notes as the next interface for teamwork. If we can just capture all the insights from every meeting, make them shareable for everyone else in the business who should know, and accessible with all the different tools we're using where work gets managed, a way to change the way we meet, to attend less meetings, for everyone in the business to be on the same page. And that's how Hugo came about. So Hugo is a team meeting note platform. It's an application, web app, and a mobile app where you take your notes. We use your calendar data to organize those notes by the contacts and companies you're meeting. So we can automatically surface the notes last time you met with that company or one of your colleagues did. And with integrations, you can go and sync with your CRM or share that insight out via Slack or your chat app, or turn it into a ticket task or action in your project management app. So it really becomes that central place, that little universe for your team's meetings.
So walk us through like a use case or like a typical, how a typical team would use it.
Sure.
Just to paint that picture a little bit, because after having taught a number of remote meetings masterclass and hearing what some of the people are struggling with in their meetings, it's kind of mind-blowing that we're still doing things the same way, that we haven't focused more on making this better. So I'm super curious. So take us through a use case scenario.
Sure. So just a few hours ago, I had a check-in with one of our big clients. before the meeting, I set agenda. So in Hugo, I went and I set out what I plan to talk about. I actually used the template that we have set up in Hugo for our clients, for key client check-ins. And when the meeting started, it was just me and the client on that call. When the meeting started, I took the agenda and I started taking notes about the conversation, like we all do on paper or in a document or wherever that ends up. And as I'm taking notes, there were some interesting insights. There was a bug they mentioned that they'd experienced. And I just quickly highlighted that, sent it out to Jira, which we use as an engineering team for bugs. There was a really interesting quote that I wanted marketing to look at for a case study, highlighted, sent that out to Asana. I synced with Salesforce as the CRM. And in general, the client was really excited about the progress and value they'd got from the product. And I shared that out via Slack. So everyone else in the team got to see that. I really was able to start. What was interesting is that someone else in the team had actually spoken to them 2 weeks earlier about something. I had those notes there. And now if I go and click on that client in Hugo, I can see all the meetings, all the notes, all the actions, all in one spot. And that happens automatically because it knows from my calendar who we're all meeting and when.
Wow, amazing. Amazing. So is your client then also able to take notes at the same time, or is it just you taking notes?
Yeah, so we can bring our client into the notes as well. So for a lot of our like customer success sort of or partnership relationships, we share a link, a bit like a Google Doc, with that client, and they can take notes with us. We can agree on that together as a team. And that's another very interesting. That came from an interesting insight that we're seeing that you've no doubt experienced, where the definition of team is changing so quickly. You know, just a few years ago, if I said team, you probably mean the same, you know, in the US, an employer or the same domain name. Now, a team means myself and an agency doing work with us. It means those two contractors that I met on Upwork. It means an advisor who we meet monthly. So being able to collaborate with these teammates is something that a lot of products out there don't support because they're not in a typical sense, and we're allowing you to do that with Hugo as well by sharing notes and allowing them to update those notes in that way.
That's awesome. Also, what I can expect, I would say most people don't have agendas for their meetings. So in this case, you've actually got an agenda, right? I mean, we just show up, we've got some sort of agenda.
Yeah.
Somebody called a meeting, everybody shows up, nobody knows what's going on. I mean, that's like, I don't know, a huge percentage. I don't know what it is, but it's like most meetings are like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they always say, I think it was Atlassian even, they say really a good meeting starts and ends on time and has an agenda. And I thought, well, that's a low bar. Like, we can do
absolutely.
that. Like, come on.
Yeah.
So I find that this is exciting
Exactly
only
right.
because you have an agenda before the meeting starts that must help enormously.
Yeah, just exactly codifying best practice like that is really important. It's been core to how we build the product, but even more generally, Hugo aside, we know from so much research that we've done the value an agenda has, and not just because of the obvious, not just because everyone knows what's happening in the meeting, but it really, from a leadership standpoint, whoever's calling the meeting, it really shows respect for people's time. I have an objective for this meeting. Here's what I want to cover. It's very easy to see the effectiveness or efficacy of the meeting, and it really keeps us, keeps us on the straight and narrow for that meeting, knowing this is what we set out to achieve. This is how we're going to do it, and whether or not we did it. And as you know, meetings are one of the most expensive parts of work. Everyone now, with the ease of just adding someone to a calendar invitation, no one thinks through the cost by having everyone in the room and the disruption costs and switching costs, especially remote, especially time zone, taking into account time zones, and treating meetings with respect through the use of agendas is absolutely critical for successful remote teams, at least.
Well, I find it very interesting because in person, people are having all these meetings all day long, but we don't find them as exhausting. And as soon as everybody went remote with COVID, we started doing the exact same thing except online. And I was hearing from everybody. I was sitting outside having lunch. Even my neighbors were coming out of their house like, I just sat through a 3-hour online meeting. And so everybody was doing that. So I do think that it's an interesting effect that everybody's had from COVID that we have to reevaluate. Do we actually need this meeting? Like, we're all reevaluating because everybody's so tired.
But our view on that, I read an article in Quartz the other day. Actually, we pulled the data and we showed that there's been a 40% increase in the number of internal meetings with just teammates since COVID hit. And
Oh,
that's
wow.
mind blowing, because the reason we saw some, when COVID first hit, if you like, when things really started to get, concerning, and the way we work was changing so quickly, we were obviously thinking, well, what does this mean for us as a business? Hugo powers a lot of remote teams, and everyone going remote did seem like a positive trend, of course. We thought, surely there'll be less meetings. Now we can't meet externally as much with people outside the company. You definitely can't meet face to face. There was a lot of talk about sales pipelines drying up. Obviously, the unfortunate job losses that are occurring. Surely there'll be less meetings. So at the end of week one, I'm like looking at the data, and I'm like, okay, there's really the same number of meetings. All right, maybe it's a transition. Week two, the number of meetings starts to increase. I'm like, what is going on? And when we had a look, and that trend continued, by the way, but when we had a look, it was simply because the volume of internal meetings had grown by so much, they were replacing and exceeding the number of external meetings that were no longer happening.
Wow.
Because what was water cooler talk, what was me, swinging by your desk and like, hey, Lisette, I had this great idea, is now a scheduled meeting. What was me as a manager worrying about my team being disengaged and not being in sync is now a scheduled meeting. All these things are just driving meeting after meeting after meeting. And so that meeting fatigue is absolutely a problem, and the data supports it.
Oh, yeah, awesome to hear that the data supports it. I've just been hearing it from everybody. And the answer that I've been giving people is, you've got to go asynchronous. That is the key to meeting fatigue. You've got to figure out how to communicate in other ways. And luckily, it's not just based on chat. Everybody thinks of chat as asynchronous, but you brought up a very good point earlier with Loom, sending video messages. Like, we don't have to be in the same place, same time. I can send my assistant, I do this daily. I send my assistant and my accountant just tons of video messages. My website designer, that's even better, because I can point to things as I'm, like this pixel here, I want you to do this pixel here.
Totally.
I think, so I want to talk a bit about how Hugo works, because I do think that asynchronous communication is going to come up with that. Describe to me, like, what does your team look like, and where is everybody located?
Sure. So our team is half engineering and half other functions, which is basically design, growth, product, and marketing. We're based across North America, Australia now, and South America. So we're that gives us nice time zone coverage, 24 hours a day. And we're a real mix of people as far as stage of life. And the reason I raise that is, from a remote standpoint, it's very interesting to see what everyone is doing in their lives outside of work, and how they balance things. Because as a sort of diverse remote team, you have people in their early 20s living in a big city who haven't left their tiny apartment in 2 months, and they're spending their nights working harder than ever because they don't have much else to do, and we're really worried about them working too hard, which sounds like a funny thing to say as a company owner, but it's very much a concern. And then we have people with families who are now have their kids at home. They're trying to school their kids, trying to balance everything, deal with the economic and health uncertainty. And we're all, one team with completely different concerns outside of work. So a very diverse team in that sense, and definitely been thinking about that more than ever now. We're I like to say, and I think it's the case, we're a very collaborative team, very, very not flat in terms of structure. I think that's an absolute misnomer, but we definitely operate an idea meritocracy where everyone has access to information. There's a lot of transparency and availability of knowledge, and wherever the best idea comes from, it wins. And we've seen that time and time again, where an engineer has a great marketing idea, or a designer has an idea for fundraising, whatever it may be. So we definitely pride ourselves on that.
Love it. So you've also mentioned, let's go to this best idea wins thing, because I worked for a company that also had that. There was, he called himself a benevolent dictator, and so there was somebody, he made the final decision. That was it. But basically, it was a very strange man. But there were rules about how you could argue. But the idea was the best idea should win, not who it came from. So how do you guys do that in your? How do you ensure that it's the best?
Sure.
How do you know when it's the best idea?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of this thinking comes from Ray Dalio's book, Principles. He talks a lot about the idea meritocracy. It's a great book, and there's a lot of really interesting ideas, and especially in a hedge fund where it operated, which is a very traditional environment. But for us specifically, it doesn't mean that we have this absolute democracy for every idea. It's very hard to operate a business like that. The idea, it's based, firstly, the prerequisite is transparency. Everyone needs all the inputs. It's very hard for everyone to add value and for the best idea to win if not everyone has the same background knowledge and information sharing. So, making documents, making work publicly accessible, sharing widely via chat apps, using products like Hugo so everyone has access to meeting notes is really a prerequisite. And then socializing problems and being willing to socialize problems is typically what drives these ideas. It doesn't mean, though, that responsibility is distributed. So ultimately, as to what we're rolling with and which idea wins, if you like, is still with the person responsible. If I'm running marketing and I've got to decide on what we're going to do with that campaign, if engineering have that great idea that they contributed in a meeting, in a video, online, in a document, sure, and that's great, and I think it's the best idea. I'll roll with it. But I'm not. We're definitely not voting as a company on every decision we make or changing the way responsibility works.
Love it. But I do think it is such an improvement on just the hierarchy where the manager
Yeah.
decides. I mean, it's just, it's so demotivating for everybody except for the guy making the decision or the gal making the
Yeah.
decision. It's just like the whole thing is, yeah, is a
It's
bummer.
demotivating, but it's also like, this was again a lesson coming from the corporate world into a startup, where initially I definitely felt as a founder of a company that I should have all the answers. And one, it's demotivating the rest of the team. But two, you've spent so much time and money hiring great people. Why would you tell them what to do and how to solve these problems? Why not have the benefit of the aggregate brains the aggregate of the brains in the room? And that was the realization there where, motivation and engagement aside, which is critical, it leads to better outcomes. You've got so many more
Yeah.
people thinking about your problem.
Yeah, totally. I've actually learned that the hard way as an entrepreneur myself. I had to hire more people. And in the beginning, I was like, okay, you've got to do it like this. And
Yeah,
at some point you have to just take a step back because the work
yeah,
was just, I've lost control. And then once I took a step back, I thought, oh, they
yeah.
could totally do that. Like, what was I
Exactly.
thinking? Like,
Better than me most of the time.
yeah. Oh man. Yeah. 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 So luxurious. So you also mentioned something about overworking, and I do feel like that is a huge issue with remote workers in general. But this class of people that you've described, people in the early 20s, they're in their apartments alone. They're in these big cities. They've usually got these big lives outside of the apartment, but now we're all stuck. So they're filling their time with working because it's easy. If people are online all day, I'm assuming you've got the
Yeah,
globe covered. You can talk to people
yeah,
anytime you want. So
yeah,
why not? Like this is now the time. How do
yeah,
you know when somebody's overworking and what do you do about it?
yeah. I really don't have a good answer there, unfortunately. It's definitely keeping us up at night at the moment. And I think all we've done is be overt about it and raise that feeling. It's clear when people are overworking in the short term because you can just see the output and the hours even that people are online all the time. And I think the issue is not even the hours of work that you're working. That I was sitting at my desk from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. or whatever it is. It's also the cognitive commitment, the fact that because I've got nothing else happening in my life right now, when I'm lying in bed, when I'm in the shower, when I'm doing anything else, all that's consuming me is work because it's the only thing happening right now, to be fair.
Right.
And that for me concerns me more, actually. I think that takes a greater toll on you as a person. The risks of burnout or even, burnout, even being extreme consequence, just being over it. And, like, you definitely reach a point where all I want to do is think about something else. And, there's almost
Yeah.
resentment towards work and that's not a good outcome. There's definitely a bit of a speedometer almost of ideal, like great output. Look, there's an opportunity to pull a few extra hours and get ahead. I appreciate that while we're all stuck inside. But if you cross that threshold, it's far worse than being on the other extreme of not getting any work done. So really, it's just looking out for it, being overt about it, and really trying to show that it's okay to switch off, to do something else, to chat about other things, and but definitely no silver bullet there, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's good that it comes from leadership also, that it's really made like so, because we tend to reward the productive workers, it's like they
Yeah,
get praise and like so there's no
yeah,
reason for them to stop. So it's really good if that leadership also shows by example. So I
absolutely.
want to ask about the transition during COVID time. So your team was already working remotely. So you said that the transition was relatively seamless, but I just wanted to ask and dive in. What happened for you guys as a team? Uh,
Yeah,
when
sure.
COVID hit.
Yeah. So half the team, more than half the team is already remote, and a few of us were based in San Francisco still. So the decision, firstly, for the office team, if you like, the San Francisco team to go remote was really easy. We do, even the team that are based in San Francisco, we do 3 days in the office and 2 days remote. So it's sort of, the office is more just a bit of a hub or a headquarters to have some sort of physical presence globally rather than needing to be there. So we were able to very quickly, as soon as things started to look a little risky or a little different around the city, we were one of the first to go remote because it's no big deal. It was a quick message to the team saying, hey, we're thinking of, just sticking at home for now, FYI sort of thing. So the cost was very low of doing that. I think definitely we spoke earlier about the ideal virtual office and things like that. We had to sort of, make sure that everyone had what they needed very quickly to be 100% set up at home. And it's funny because even though I'm working at home, say 40% of the week already, you still psychologically it wasn't my office. It was the place where I was when I wasn't in my real office. So investing in the environment and setup, expectations with family, those sorts of things was probably the most significant change as at a personal level when we made that change. But other than that, there really wasn't much to it. A few of the team members now have traveled, they've gone home to family. As I mentioned, I'm in Australia. Time zone coordination a little bit. And again, that's just staying in sync. Here's where I'm going to be. Here's the overlap. How does that work for everyone? Is there any consequence on the business? But again, that's a quick message and backwards and forwards in 5 minutes and we're up and running. So very, very seamless, I must say. Which
Right, but
we're
not to
lucky to say, yeah.
underestimate. Yeah, very lucky. There are certain companies in this instance that they were set up for this really to begin with. But I do want to at least mention and not underestimate how significant that setting up the home office and making the agreements with families is.
Yeah.
Because even
Yeah.
like, for instance, I have my own home office and my husband and I, we don't even have kids. We did just get a puppy, which, man, I have a new respect for parents, even after just 2 weeks of raising a puppy. I don't know how parents
Yeah.
survive. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
even making the
Yeah.
agreement between him and myself, when
Yeah.
I started being 100% from home and he also had to be 100% from home, that was a change. Even that was really, I wouldn't say it's dramatic, but it was not easy. And we
No,
had
for
it
sure.
luxurious. So there's all kinds of families out there, I'm sure. So don't underestimate that, how intense that transition time is, I'd say.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then layer on top of it, the economic uncertainty and the difficulty faced by business. It's not like we're switching to work from home in the normal
Right.
world, where we're doing it in an environment where business is more stressful than it's ever been before in many cases.
And
So
health.
totally agree. And health, exactly. Most importantly,
Yeah, it's not
we
like
also
just it's
worry
like a
about
stroll in the
ourselves.
woods.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry
Yeah,
to
that's
interrupt.
right.
Yeah, every
No,
time I go out, I'm like, oh, it's not
exactly.
just a walk in the woods. It's like, okay, how do I avoid everybody else who's
Yeah.
also walking in the woods? Like,
Totally, and stock up on food and make sure I've got everything I need. And yeah, absolutely. So we're balancing like all these incredibly stressful constraints and influences on our life all at the same time, while making this key adjustment into with the way we work. So you're
yeah,
right. It's not that tangible, so it's easy to underestimate, but it's probably one of the most creative things that you wouldn't even think about in making the shift to remote.
yeah. I'm very curious what the like post-traumatic stress will look like when this is over. I think that
Yeah.
it's like how much stress can you have from staying home and watching Netflix? But
Yeah.
it's a
No.
psychological something about it that
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be
Divorce,
interesting.
like honestly, relationship breakdown, like it'll be very interesting to see. I think in the positive and negative sense, my relationship with my wife's changed, and I've heard it anecdotally with lots of friends, but both positively and negatively, where it's a new side. You're working with your husband essentially now, and that's not something you signed up to do originally. So
Right.
What
Right.
does that
For
mean?
months at
Yeah.
a time. Yeah, we're both like,
Yeah.
man, I like you a lot, but like 24/7 a lot. That's like
Yeah,
a lot, a lot.
exactly.
You know?
Ready for you to exactly get back to your own. Yeah,
Totally.
totally.
Okay, so I just have a couple questions because we're getting to the end of our time. But man, I have like all these notes. But one of the questions first I wanted to ask is, why go from a luxurious corporate lawyer job? It doesn't sound like it's it's not a low paying thing. Why go from a job like that? Why build Hugo? Why?
Yeah. Yeah, in question. I think in general, at a personal level, I'm a builder. I'm an entrepreneur. I love solving problems in that way, and I love the idea of being able to create value beyond my time, if that makes sense. So, in professional services in particular, there's a lot of really smart people there that are very helpful and critical to building businesses. But when they're asleep, they're not creating any value. When they're sitting with you and charging you some exorbitant fee per hour, that's how you get value out of them. With Hugo and with software, or many other companies, media and other companies too, I can create something that continues to create value for the world and for many people while I'm asleep or while I'm on vacation. And that concept for me, that one-to-many way of thinking, really was something I just couldn't let go of or couldn't stop thinking about. So that was one. And I think two, the other cool thing about tech in particular, which is very the tech world and the industry is very forward thinking as far as ways of working and future of work and all that, as we know. The diversity of perspective and people is something that you don't get very often in the corporate world. The types of people I'm working with, and I don't mean just typical diversity from a race or gender standpoint. I mean also just the way people think and different perspectives and beliefs and values. And I really now feel like I'm working with people from so many different perspectives, and that's changed the way I think. It's given me a whole lot more ideas, a whole lot more solutions to tough problems, and I think I'm a far more effective professional because of it.
Yeah, diversity is a total superpower. It cannot be denied. I mean, just even people
Yeah,
that have traveled a lot, that's the
yeah,
whole
exactly.
beauty and power of travel, is to
Yeah,
see like, oh, you can take
yeah,
hours naps in the middle of the afternoon and like
yeah,
it's okay, or you could take the summer off. Like people in Europe,
yep,
when I
yeah,
first moved to
me
Europe,
too.
I couldn't
Yeah,
believe people took July and
yeah,
August off. Like, what?
yeah,
But it works. It
totally.
totally
Yeah,
works.
they're still
So,
successful and living. Yeah, totally. Yeah,
it's awesome.
exactly.
So okay, I said I had two more, but I actually now still have two more. So the second to the last question is, I want to talk about this. I got this TechCrunch article from your
Yeah.
colleague today. So I want to just give you a chance to say like what just happened that you made TechCrunch.
Yeah. So we just closed a fundraising round. We raised a $6 million round from Google's early stage AI fund called Gradient and Slack, and a couple of others, which is really exciting. Obviously, having great investors invest in your business is always a good sign. It's obviously helpful too to allow us to grow and achieve goals. But really, what's most exciting, I think, about that news specifically is the partnerships that come with working with the likes of Google and Slack and others. They are obviously leading the future of work and the way and have such a heavy influence on the way we work. We have these views on the power of or the role of meetings in the future of work, and being
Yep.
able to partner with them to sort of dictate what that may look like for us in the next 10 years is really exciting. So that was definitely some good news in the midst of all this craziness for us.
Yeah, totally. Although Slack before this, they had their employees work at the office. I read online. That was
It did.
the information.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, maybe you have a little to teach them
Yeah.
too, right?
No, I've learned I wouldn't want to be a landlord of any of these big tech companies that were spending a fortune on office space
Yeah,
before
the
this hit,
Twitter
because I think
building.
they've learned. Yes, exactly. That's
Yeah.
right.
Oh God. Yeah, it's gonna be weird, but yeah, this is a
I
weird
know.
year. Okay,
Yes,
so
for sure.
the for real second to the last question now, which is if you had advice for people, um, let's if you have advice for people who are starting out in meetings, like they're like, okay, I'm curious, like what would be the best way to start with Hugo? How would you advise doing it?
Sure. So the best way to start with Hugo is, I mean, practically it's very easy. You can hit our website and sign up and get going. But at a more theoretical level, the power of meeting notes is sort of far greater than what you would have ever expected or thought about. it really reflects this huge investment that you've made in your meeting and allows you to use that as a force to align your team, drive action, and make the way you work so efficient. So definitely, even if Hugo is not for you, I definitely encourage you to think about the agenda and the meeting note as really the way to capture the value of meetings. And if you're spending upwards of 40-50% of your week in meetings, as we're seeing for most professionals, how can you not be investing in processes and tools to capture the value of your meeting? So definitely check out Hugo, but otherwise, regardless, that process is critical.
Well, what I really liked about what you said about Hugo is the ability to take snippets of the meeting. Like, here's a quote for marketing, bam. Here's something for Jira, bam. Like, and then you've got the record, because you're right. People, we go into meetings, we have these amazing brainstorming sessions or amazing discussions, and then the meeting ends and it's over. Like, that information kind of gets processed. Maybe the action items happen, but we could do so much better. And it is the main way really that we're communicating with our remote team. So it behooves us to get really good at it. Like, we get trained for all kinds of things, but like, we still do shitty meetings. No excuses anymore.
No, you're right. Exactly.
So very last question, which is, if people want to find out more about you, of course, I'm going to link to Hugo.team in the show notes, but if people want to know more about you, where should they go?
Sure. I'm a big LinkedIn and Twitter fan. So you can find me, Darren Chait, on LinkedIn. Feel free to add me, and definitely would love to continue the conversation there, or Darren Chait on Twitter as well. I'm a little bit more of a consumer than a contributor on Twitter, but definitely love being a part of the conversation about the future of work and the way teams are collaborating. So very, very open to continue the conversation there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I took copious notes and look forward to doing the show notes, and I will definitely be checking out Hugo myself. So thank you very much.
Yeah, likewise. Great to chat. Thanks for that.
All right. Until next time, everybody, be powerful.